What's your last name? Is it actually Threats?
No, it's Threats.
Threats, okay.
That's a true English pronunciation.
Threats, okay. I read it, I go, that is a pretty wicked last name. All right.
Yeah, I'm ready when you are.
Excellent, all right. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure of speaking to Roderick Threats. He is the chair of the Utah Black Republican Assembly and host of the Conservative Enclave. Roderick, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, my man.
So, I find you particularly insightful on issues involving Black Americans and the Constitution. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are, and kind of what you're all about.
Well, I can pretty much say I was born into this, literally. I grew up in a very conservative household. Actually, my father was a libertarian, and my mom, she's what you would call a bulldog Democrat, and so I had a little bit of the conservatism, then I had the liberty aspect in my life, right? So I was just groomed into this from the start, and I think it took college for the most part. Well, let me back up a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. When I was 13, 14, I was actually the chairman of our county Young Republicans. And so this was back in the late 80s. And we were a politically active group per se, as far as the local stuff was concerned, because my love was for all the local stuff, right? Because I understood from a young age that liberty, if you impede on liberty at the local level, then the state level and federal level impedance on liberty is not even going to matter at that point in time, unless you take care of the local liberty. So I was real active in that, and then I went to college, and I actually took a break from college politics because of the career I pursued. I really didn't have much time, to dabble in politics. But in the states that I lived, New York, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, I was a state delegate in most of those states. So I still took part in the process of vetting candidates and things like that. And then a few years later, almost 20 some odd years later after that, I ended up in Utah. And I wasn't politically active at first, per se, in the state, but I was still out here, talking about, fascism, because my thing is fascism. I call myself a fascism scholar, per se, because I've studied it inside, upside down, inside out, to understand all the internal workings of it. And then obviously along with that, the Constitution I've been learning since I could read, literally, at that point. I've just kind of combined all that stuff together, and then here I am. I got politically active here in Utah probably, 3 years ago. Since 2019. I can't count. It was like
a long time.
It was like 2000. Yeah, it was like 2015. I got politically active here, and then I became a member of the Utah Black Republican Assembly, and I was made the executive director straight away. And then eventually I went from executive director, elected as vice chair, and then now elected as chairman of the assembly this year. So that's my road.
Wow, that's awesome. So you actually have a lot of experience in local politics and kind of campaigning and some of the stuff that people aren't really aware of, or most people aren't.
Right, yeah, because I ran for our Salt Lake County Council last election cycle. I didn't make it out of convention, but it was the first time I had ever ran for office in a place that no one knew me. So the amount of delegate votes I got, I was actually shocked and surprised. And what was really sad about it was I was running against my friend for to get a Republican nomination to run for county council. So, but either way, it was fun, right? I threw all my support at her, even though she did lose. Not big, but I threw all my support I had at her, and everybody kind of joined in with her and all that good stuff. So it was definitely good. Yeah,
I think a lot of the conversation you see online and social media, certainly in the news, it's a lot of national stuff, and I feel like the local stuff is always overlooked, when in actuality, not that the national stuff is irrelevant, but I think local politics has a major impact on your day-to-day life. I mean, if it's actually where you physically live most of the time, and it's a shame that we don't pay more attention to state and local politics.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, if we look at the current state of our cities, and I know we keep bringing it up. There it is. Yeah, my microphone kind of just like went on the fritz there. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. No problem.
But what we don't pay attention to is like I said, with the cities, right? I mean, we look at, I know the big talking point is look at the Democrat-ran cities, et cetera, right? And it's like, yeah, look at them. Look at what's happened, right? And you have to look at it and say, it's not necessarily failed leadership. It's failed choices when it comes to local stuff. It's failed choices because, and I harp on my party all the time. If you don't present choices for people to try to make a choice and make a difference, what are they stuck with?
Yeah, and this is actually... go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying I mean, what are you stuck with? You're stuck with one side or the other, right? You're stuck with hyper-partisan activity. And then we know now the narrative now is like, well, why don't people in the cities vote Republican? Well, put up a Republican challenger. I've been saying this for the last 6 years. Put up a Republican challenger.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? Go ahead, yeah. What's interesting about all that is, I used to be one of these guys as well. I mean, we all know the stats of the crime stats in cities. We all know, all the same stuff that's kind of brought up whenever this issue of race is discussed. And, I'm thankful, kind of for you guys, you and there's Jeff on the right, and you guys on the Black Conservative Roundtable. I enjoy listening. That's always fun when you guys get together. And yeah, I mean, it is imperative that we give them that choice you're talking about. And it's one thing to talk about those statistics and to blame the Democrats for how they're running cities, but it's another thing entirely to say, well, now it's time to let's go campaign against them. Let's give these cities an option against this, and let's see what happens then.
Yeah, and that's where the conversation falls short. Because,
yes.
I mean, we see it online on social media, right? They're like, well, they should just vote Republican, and all these people. And it's like, and a lot of these people I know live in cities, that are Democrat-run or close by. It's like, why are you not doing, for example, what Scott Pressler's doing, going to the cities and eventually, I'm not saying go pick up garbage or anything, but you go talk to these people. Because here's the thing, vast majority of Black America is very conservative. Very conservative. I mean, it's in our roots. I mean, we can go back and talk about Andrew Burke, right? And that's where Black conservatism really comes from. We're Burkean conservatives by nature. Okay, and once you tap into that and get people to understand, hey, you know what? It's okay to be conservative, right? Because this is what you know. This is what you know. This is what you know across the board. But to turn on and tell people to say that you're voting against your best interest without presenting that case and letting them know it's okay to be conservative is the other problem. And that's why a lot of people, a lot of Black Americans that live in the inner cities don't at least come to the center, because they see that and then they hear the rhetoric that the left is talking about, and it just reinforces their thought. Well, I know I'm conservative, but it's like, I can't vote with those guys because they're this, that, and the third. And it's completely self-defeating.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting, because, you would think, or at least the narrative, the mainstream narrative is that, not that I think anyone would say this out loud, but it almost seems like the Republicans have all but given up in these inner cities. And they just, I mean, in my own experience with this is just over in Bridgeport, there was almost not even going to be a Republican candidate until DeJohn Francis stood up and said, whoa, no one's going to run. I'll do it. He's going door to door, and he's making the conservative case to the folks in Bridgeport. And had he not done that, I mean, once he did it, then I think a couple other people joined in. But it's like, I wonder if he didn't do that, would the guy have run unopposed? I mean, it's exactly what you're talking about. You need to present an alternative, and if you don't, silence also speaks a lot of words. in essence, that if you're not willing to even go and make the case and to go meet the folks, and then all you have is the one singular message from the Democrats, whatever it is. I mean, what other choice do they have, in essence?
Right, and we do have to give them, you do have to give people choices. And going back to what you're saying about how the GOP has given up, I think it's not. Okay, let me reverse my thought on this one.
Sure.
It's not the fact of giving up. It's the fact of lacking the support. It's just like the situation with Baltimore, right? Baltimore is one of those unique situations where they have a city party, right? Like most states, cities and states, you have a county party, right? And obviously the city is encompassed. Well, Baltimore being an independent city, they have a Baltimore City GOP. Then they have a Baltimore County GOP, and they have a state GOP. Okay.
Okay.
The state GOP should be reaching out because whoever's the chair and the vice chair of the Baltimore City GOP has a seat on the state central committee. Why? Why are those two individuals? And I know they've said something. I'm sure they have. Why hasn't the state GOP is like, okay, we need to divert some resources down here?
Yeah,
right,
it makes
to
you
Baltimore
wonder.
City. Right, and it's like, why hasn't this happened in a place like that, or in a place like Chicago, a place like Atlanta, or any city of any size? Really, if you look at a city that's over almost 50,000 people, more than likely they have a lineage of Democrat mayors.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So now when we look at this timeline, and a lot of cities have gone nonpartisan. Like, for example, the principal city here for me is Salt Lake City. It's nonpartisan. It's a nonpartisan race. But even though obviously you can tell, who's Democrat, who's Republican. Well, let me don't say that who's left and who's right. You can tell, right, by what they talk about. But a lot of these races have become nonpartisan because of people in the cities think that the two-party system is failing. But really, in the same, you can call it the two-party system or nonpartisan election. You're still going to get one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. You said earlier that for Black Americans that they have this draw to liberty, and I want to get your expand on that a little bit. Do you think that Black Americans have admire the Constitution? In your estimation?
I do. I do. I think they do understand the Constitution, but here's the underlying issue. Mm-hmm. They're not taught the Constitution.
That's true.
When you have school systems that are failing children in inner cities where you're only having 60% proficiency graduating high school, how do you expect someone to interpret a constitution?
This is exactly correct. That's not just an inner city problem. That's a nationwide problem where we're not taught proper history. We're not taught the Constitution. We're not taught anything. At best, you're going to get in a public school, 1 year of American history, and then that's it. And that's simply just not enough time to go over the specifics of our history or the Constitution in general.
Not at all. Not at all. And a lot of the history that's being taught now is post JFK.
What do you mean by that?
A
exactly?
lot of it, everything after JFK, they're drilling down on everything. For JFK, they're not even really touching on it. And there are so many things that happen. Especially that critical period between 1863, right, and 1943. That's a very critical period for the United States, and they don't teach any of that. And they pick it apart and say, oh well, slavery is bad. Slavery went here. Then there was the Ku Klux Klan, right, and all this, but nothing in between. Any of the good stuff in between they talk about, and how people and how America got to where it was.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think that the point of history is not to whitewash it and make it this, not to make it this horrible thing, or even only the good stuff. It's the history. Just tell the truth about it. We had hard times in America. We were bad sometimes, but we also did some good stuff too. Let's just be honest about the history and let people make up their minds about it. But, at least let's get the history correct. And especially,
Right.
and it's been my experience, having talked to Black Americans and friends of mine and coworkers and whatnot, that before I can even start talking about the values of the Constitution and why it matters and the Bill of Rights and rights and responsibilities and all these kind of higher ideals that I think you and I would agree with, I find that it's just they don't feel connected to the country. They feel like they're living in a country that almost kind of rejects them or denies them. And you kind of see it in some of the terms. Like a lot of times people identify as African American. And to me, it's like, that's almost like me saying, oh, I'm like Irish American, when I don't have any connection to Ireland whatsoever. I mean, sure, maybe my ancestors descended from there, maybe, at some point in my life, but I have never been there personally, and I have no connection to their culture or anything about it. I was born here, and I'm in this culture, and it's a totally different world, literally. And I think for me, that's the first thing I want to overcome with people. I want them to know, like, no, listen, there is just a plethora of rich Black political history in America that is not taught. Like, even as far back as the Revolutionary War days, James Armistead being really the modern day 007. He was a double agent for the Americans, for George Washington.
Yep.
And that's just the start of it. I mean, then you can go into I think one of the first, the first 7 Black congressmen, my personal favorite being Robert Brown Elliott, who was just, fantastic when you read some of his debates that he had on the House floor against actual real racists. And it's, I believe actually one of them was the former vice president of the Confederacy. They had this great epic debate on I believe it was the House floor. And his speech was so eloquent that later on the dissidents against him were just saying, oh, it was so good he couldn't have written that himself. It had to have been someone else. I mean, there's so much to it.
Yep. And a lot of people don't know the first Speaker of the House was a Black man. A lot of people don't know that either.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's like you're sitting here and it's like all this stuff that that you can talk about, but you want to take. Folks want to take the bad parts of American history and apply it to Black people. And the narrative that we see now, going back to your first point, right, and here, is that the slave mentality. Actually, I did a show on it last night, The Psychology of Slavery, and I talked about where the psychological coercion, right, how they would say white is right, and Black was bad, and how Blacks ended up like spewing this deep self-hatred, and they wanted to be white. I mean, I've even heard Black people say that I would rather be white, right? And that goes back to that narrative that was pushed down, and it's been pushed down over the generations. The question is, how do we get that bleeding to stop? Because it's so deep rooted into the psyche of a lot of Black Americans. How do we change that? Right now, going back to the liberty aspect and the Constitution aspect, right? I always tell people it's imperative. I lecture a group at the public library here once a month on a Saturday, usually the third Saturday of the month. And I actually lecture about federalism, because if people don't understand federalism, they'll never understand the Constitution. Okay? And I was like, the one thing you need to understand is Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause. If you don't understand that particular clause, none of the rest of the Constitution is going to matter, and you're just going to let everything fly that goes right by you and not even really pay attention to what's happening, or vote against your best interest. And I'm not saying best interest as far as conservative or liberal, et cetera. Your best interest and the government securing your rights and liberty and freedom under that document.
Yeah, absolutely.
You will undermine that every single time.
Yeah, I think especially, the Supremacy Clause, in addition with the 9th and 10th Amendment, which kind of, further clarify some of the problems they were having during the whole ratification period, where, you had the Federalists saying that, listen, we're against the Bill of Rights because there are problems with listing rights, because then that implies that these are the only rights that are protected, when in reality, you have all of the rights, listed and not listed. And
Right.
and that's one of it's such an amazing thing to think about at that time period where you have this group of anti-federalists and the Federalists, and people incorrectly think that they were kind of opposed to each other when really no, they both had the same mindset of liberty. They both agreed on liberty, and their only argument was that which way preserves that liberty in a better way, I guess. And the anti-federalists were successful, at least in convincing them to get a Bill of Rights, which I think was, looking where we are now, I think was a good thing. But it's like if we understood that kind of concept, that listen, no, our rights are indefinite, it's unlimited, and it's only these certain powers we're giving to a federal government where they can legislate. Particularly in Article 8 of the first, Article 1, Section 8. It's like that's all Congress can legislate on. It's like that's it.
Right.
You have all the other powers for everything else.
Yep, that's exactly correct, and and I get into conversations with that too. Speaking of rights and all that stuff, and another thing that I really point to is the 10th Amendment, right?
Yes.
And how quote unquote it's state rights. Well, and a lot of people understand that. Oh yeah, it's a state right. Well, states don't have rights. States have powers. And I try to get people to understand that states have powers. People have rights. And people make up the state.
Absolutely correct.
So, right. So it's, well, once you get folks past, once I get folks past that concept with the supremacy clause, then I can get them to understand federalism and how it works on every level, and how the Constitution, in conjunction with your state constitutions, like for us, it's Article 13 of our state constitution, that guarantees a Republican form of government all the way down, to the community council level, right? But once we get folks to understand that concept, then, only then, we can explain federalism, explain how local government works for you, and how easy it is to get things done on a local level than it is on a national level. Because we have to get the people out of the mindset that the national government can create everything. They will forego the 10th Amendment for the federal government to do everything. And it's like, no, Article 1, Section 8, that's all they can do. That's it. That's all right there. That's it. They do nothing else. Everything else you asking them to do, like health care and all that, no. And then you get people that say, well, the General Welfare Clause, no, that's not what it was intended for. That is not what it was intended for. Let's try that again. Won't you try to read Federalist number 33 to understand what they meant about the General Welfare Clause? And then you're like, oh, okay, maybe the ACA is unconstitutional. Duh.
Yes, actually, it's so funny you mentioned the General Welfare Clause, because I actually wrote, probably now a few years ago, probably it was 2013, 2015, I wrote an article. I guess I just put it on Facebook. It was in response to a friend of mine who had brought that up. I forgot what the issue was, but they just kind of threw it out there. Like, what do you mean the government can do it per the General Welfare Clause? Oh, have you read the Constitution? And I went nuts. And I'll have to send it to you. I think you'd actually really enjoy it. I mean, that the idea of the General Welfare Clause, that it's this unlimited grant of power to the government, is actually discussed during the convention while they were drafting it. And that was actually one of the oppositions to it. They were like, listen, this clause is going to, like, why even in fact, this is what James Madison would say. He would say that in a letter to Henry Lee, I think it was, he would say that why would we go through the trouble of listing all these powers and spending all these weeks discussing the powers of Congress when at the end of it we just write, oh, by the way, general welfare, they can do whatever they want. Like, what's the purpose of listing out specifics when we're just going to give them unlimited power anyway? It doesn't make sense. The only way you can coherently understand the Constitution as it's as if you read it as a list of enumerated powers, and then general welfare is just kind of like the clause that says, well, these are the powers that they have to enforce the general welfare, to basically to support the general welfare of the country using the powers herein granted.
Right. And with that too, the General Welfare Clause, right? If you get people to imply, right, the three powers of government, right, the enumerated powers, the reserve powers, and the implied powers, people will understand what that General Welfare Clause really means, what it's intended to, and every day, and I try to point it out every day, but it gets tiresome. It gets really tiresome. It's like, you see what this particular bill is doing? You know anything about implied powers? Yeah, this is stumping all over it. I mean, the big thing, right? HR 1 is the big thing I use, for example, all the time now, since that's the big hot button subject, right? And how it impedes on the elections clause, how it impedes on the 10th Amendment, how it impedes on the 14th Amendment, and in some ways impede on the 12th. In some cases. And it's like, you understand, like, the government is taking away the state's implied power. That is your power that they are taking away from you.
Oh, could you, actually explain HR 1? I don't know if I don't even know what that is, actually.
Oh, HR 1 is the Florida People's Act. That was the one where they're going to revamp the election system. And basically, they have to, and so I did a video on it, video breakdown on it. But basically, it's quote unquote what their version of election security. People, all the election machines that are produced or made outside the country have to be gone, have to be replaced with made in America. Which, I don't mind, made in America. That's cool, right? Okay. But here's the kicker that no one actually read in actually Section 12 of that bill is that anybody, let's just say me and you create a voting machine.
Yep. And
it's totally secure. The government takes the intellectual property from the owner of that built the product in that bill.
So, like, if we had a copyright or a patent on it, we can't even have it? Government just takes it?
Nope, can't have it. Yep, it's got to be public domain. And it's like, really? Is that what we're doing? And it's like, how do you do that, right? If we're supposed to be a free, we're a mixed economy, but if we're
Nope, I think we lost you for a second there, but I think I knew what you were saying. That basically,
there it is.
Yeah, I mean, you were probably, if I could summarize, you were probably just saying that, listen, if you're going to take the time to invest and create something, you should be afforded the ability to kind of profit off it for a time period.
Right. Yep, that's exactly correct, and that's what HR, one of the things HR 1 does. The other thing that HR 1 does is adds a multiplier to your donation that the government gives out to candidates. So in other words, if you give a Republican candidate $1,000, well, guess what? That $1,000 doesn't necessarily go towards that candidate, right? Mm-hmm. They'll put in $2,000, right? They'll equal it 1,000, if I remember, or it was 1 in 5 or something of the sort, and they will turn around and give it to whatever candidate, and it's like,
what? That's strange.
Yeah, about that. You know what I mean? So yeah, so there are so many things that goes into that bill, but it just impedes. It literally impedes on liberty all the way down to the state level.
Wow. Yeah, it's stuff like that drives me nuts because, right now I'm kind of writing out some I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, but I've been writing this stuff out, just kind of some of my deeper thoughts that I've had and kind of just what I think are just kind of common sense, basic stuff that it's kind of overlooked. And, with respect to governmental principles, I suppose. And the first thing I thought of is that, one of the things I think that is missing in all of these things is just predictability. I mean, our government is so large in terms of executive branch bureaucracies. There's so many laws and rules and regulations. I mean, the Federal Register the Federal Register is what, like 1 million pages at this point? And how many of us have ever read a single law or a single, any of it, basically? How many of us know any of the rules that really govern our lives, that can hold us criminally liable if we violate them? And yet we know almost nothing about it. Even if we wanted to try to learn it, we would need like thousands of lawyers to explain things to us because we couldn't. It's in language that the common man doesn't understand.
No, not at all. And we can thank Jimmy Carter for that, for starting the Office of the Administrative State. For that, that's what really started the whole thing. We have these unelected bureaucrats that really can determine if you, in some cases, live or die. I mean, that's just where we're at, and they can't be held accountable. Who are you going to hold accountable? The president? How? At the election? Yeah, those people still being, in their positions unless the preceding president decides to fire them.
Yeah,
but they're still there, you know?
yeah, and I think that having so many laws, especially criminal laws, specifically criminal laws, are where it gets really problematic, I think, because I think the Congressional Research Unit or Service, I think it is, they attempted to count the number of criminal offenses that there were, and they couldn't count them. There were so many they couldn't physically count them, and their best estimate was in the tens of thousands. So I mean,
Right.
it's incredible. So what does that mean for people like you and I? It means that basically anytime a police officer engages with us, I mean, there's an infinite, almost seemingly infinite, tens of thousands of reasons they can do that. So it's almost as if, because there aren't like a set amount of rules and we don't even understand them or even know what they are, it almost gives the government unlimited resources and reason or rationale to enter into our private lives. And I think that's part of the reason why you see some of the stuff that you see with police interacting with different individuals in society.
Right, that's correct. I mean, even we can take it as close as 2009 when Barack Obama weaponized the IRS against Tea Party groups.
Oh, yes.
We can. That's evident right there. But people are still in denial about how that all happened. But apparently, the judicial branch decided that they were in the wrong, and they ended up paying out like $300 million. I think it was, if I remember correctly. But there's so much, that the regulatory state has done to create our police state, right? I mean, they literally created a police state by all these different, regulations and specific targeting. I mean, it's insanity. And even going back to the criminal laws, majority of the criminal laws on the books shouldn't even be there because, I mean, you can cover pretty much all of it with 10 laws. I mean, it's like you look at hate speech, this whole hate speech thing, whatever. It's like, or hate crimes. I'm like, hate crimes, really? You hear the logic of this hate crime? Majority of crimes is driven by hate. So are you going to charge everybody with a hate crime? I had someone tell me, well, no, that's not true. If someone steals something, then that's not a hate crime. It's not. You don't hate the people in the store you walking into to commit that crime. You think every crime is an emotionless crime?
Yeah,
there's some sort of emotion behind it, and it's more like the hatred or dislike. You going to charge everybody with a hate crime?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be applied equally across the board.
No, none of it's applied equally. Like my friend Sonny Johnson says, she says conservatism applied equally, right? Everything, justice needs to be applied equally, a whole 9 yards. I mean, I'm at the point I call the Department of Justice the Department of Just Us, because that's basically where we're going.
Oh, it's clever. Yeah, it's just frustrating because you look at it and you're even if you would want to get a grasp on, even if let's say let's say you're President Trump right now and you're like, I want to know exactly what's going on in everything right now. I don't think you could possibly do it. I think being president is almost impossible right now because you have probably like 150 different agencies. All of them have their own directors and secretaries. All of them have their own, assistant secretaries. All these people moving around every day, in a lot of cases creating laws, enforcing laws. I mean, it's almost impossible for one man to be in charge of all that, and yet he's supposed to be. And this doesn't just apply to Trump. This applies to any president. I mean, Obama, Bush. I mean, anyone who's going to take on this challenge has to admit that it's impossible because you can't keep track of. I mean, an executive branch that employs over 2 million people. Last I checked.
Yeah, over 2 million. Yeah, you're right.
It's impossible. I mean, I don't see why do we need, for example, why do we need like a Department of Defense and also a Homeland Security Department? I mean, we're paying for the same thing twice almost, it seems. Why do we need 150 different agencies? There's probably more than that because when you include subdivisions and, sub-bureaucracies and all these things, it's crazy. And what's more upsetting about that is that even you have 100 different agencies and all the subdivisions. A lot of these agencies are executing, exercising legislative, executive, and judicial powers in a lot of cases. You know, the EPA being one of them, actually.
Right. Yeah, they're a big one. But see, here's the thing, right? I'm gonna go back when your previous statement about why do we have a Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security.
Sure.
Well, there's two reasons. There's one big reason for that, and it's the posse comitatus, right? Because you gotta remember, federal troops or U.S. military cannot fight domestically, so we had to create another department for that to happen, right? So we have the Homeland Security, right? Which Coast Guard, CBP, they're all our domestics.
Oh, so it's actually
right.
It actually is a different branch, I guess, or a different division.
Yeah, right. It's a completely different division, and and obviously FEMA falls under Homeland Security, et cetera, right?
Okay.
And a lot of that came about because when the Coast Guard was under the Department of Treasury up until Eisenhower's administration. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then they ended up going under DOT soon after, because obviously Coast Guard aids in navigation. Well, we could use them to stop drug runners. Well, they stayed under DOT until after the INS got scrapped, right? The INS got scrapped, and then here comes DHS. And then the Coast Guard comes in and basically falls under DHS at that point, and then all Border Patrol, ICE, and all those guys, they fall under Homeland Security. So that's why we have the two splits.
Gotcha.
It's because of posse comitatus, right? And that has, and obviously we know the last 9 months, 10 months, it's become a controversy because Trump is activating, or they're federalizing the National Guard to go down to the border. Mm-hmm. And the state governors, in their own right, have the power to say, well, no, not really. But when President Trump invokes the posse comitatus, the governor can't do anything. At the end of the day, if Trump really wanted to be a mean guy, all those governors that told him no or pulled their troops back without his notification, he could charge them with treason.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the president has a lot of authority to call for it, especially I think with, they basically nationalized the Federal Reserve, National Guard, I should say. Right. I believe in the early 1900s at some point. I don't remember the exact date, but it was a slow process.
Yeah, it was like 1900s, yep.
Yeah, I remember I was just reading about that when I was going over my studies on the militia clauses. And kind of the evolution of how the federal government basically did take over the National Guard, and so it's more of a national entity than anything else.
Right.
But yeah, wow, I didn't know that about Homeland Security. I honestly just assumed it was like another, I assumed they actually did foreign affairs, but you're saying they actually do more domestic kind of work.
Right, that's correct. Now, the National Guard, if I remember correctly, still falls under DOD. They don't fall under DHS, so that's why they can get by. You know what I mean? With shipping them overseas and things like that. But yeah, that's why the posse comitatus doesn't allow federal troops to engage in any type of potential wartime activity or anything on U.S. soil during peacetime.
Interesting.
Now, if it was an invasion, obviously it's a different story. If it's an invasion, different story altogether.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, so that's why we have the National Guard. So,
Well, while we're on the topic of Trump, what do you make of this whole Trump-Russia collusion, corruption, whatever they're calling it now? What's the word I'm looking for? They're looking for what are they looking for now on? Well, first it was collusion, then it was obstruction. Yeah, obstruction. That's what I'm looking at. What do you make of all that?
That obstruction thing, I mean, that whole thing was I called it from the start that this whole thing was a lie. I called it from the start. So I'm like, really? This guy got all this money, and you think he's going to collude with Russia when he could basically finance the next 3 presidents' campaign, no problem. He's going to collude with Russia for votes, really? But the whole obstruction thing, that's a fine line, right? Because I sit here and I think about it like, okay, if a president does this certain thing, yeah, it's kind of impeding on an investigation, but then that dreaded article in the Constitution called Article 2 comes into play every single time. And I'm sitting here like, well, he could fire the special counsel if he wanted to. He could fire everybody throughout the executive branch, period. Would that be impeding on an investigation? He's within his constitutional rights. So it's like, for me, it's a complete nothing burger to get the people riled up that don't know the Constitution.
Yeah, and I think
that's
go ahead.
No, I said that was the ploy.
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely. I think for me, the most upsetting factor involved in this whole rush, I mean, with the investigations, it's my understanding that Trump is still a U.S. citizen, even though he is the president. He still has constitutional rights, and I'm looking at it kind of as if like you or I were investigated by a police department. You'd be wondering, what crime are you investigating me for? We have to realize that there are still rules for like investigations. You don't just get to investigate people and then try to find crimes. You need a predicate reason or a cause to go and start investigating people. You can't just randomly decide you're going to do it. And for the life of them, and Dan Bongino, another guy I listen to, I mean, he's written 2 books on this now. He's basically saying, what's the crime? Like, investigations are fine, but like you need probable cause to establish, some of these things. Or you at least need a standard of evidence to either start an investigation or continue an investigation. And at this point, all you're seeing on the left they're just saying, oh, we're just investigating because we know there's a crime somewhere, we just haven't found it yet. And to me, that is such a terrifying precedent to set that, if we don't like you, we will just use federal tax dollars to investigate the hell out of you, investigate your friends, investigate your business partners. I mean, I can't think of anything more terrifying. And I just wonder how this is going to play out when Trump isn't president anymore. I fear for that guy. I don't know I don't know if the government's going to come after him with that. I mean, I can only imagine,
Yeah, I hear you. See, what a lot of people, we have to get folks to understand too, is that more than anything, the Constitution applies to Donald Trump or any federal employee, because federal employees are technically public employees. Mm-hmm. Their laws fall under the Constitution. Just like the whole thing with the release the taxes. No, don't violate that man's Fourth Amendment. If he doesn't want to release them, that's his business. Leave that man's money alone, right? And the whole slew of things, the due process clause, all that, they have just sat there and violated it, and no one else seems to care. Well, obviously, people on the other side don't even care about that. Don't care about that at all. I mean, we can sit here all day and talk about the alleged constitutional violations that Donald Trump has had, that the left has put out there, and just completely swat them away just by reading the Constitution itself. You can't make things read what they don't read. But see, what the left likes to do is change the language of words.
Yes.
They like to change the meaning of words. They know that word means exactly what it says. Don't change it. It means what it says.
Yeah, I think the best example... Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the best example of that I can remember is James Comey testifying about Hillary Clinton. Instead of being grossly negligent, she was, extremely careless, I think he said, or something like that?
Yep, extremely careless. Yep, exactly. Same word.
Yep. But one is a criminal offense and the other isn't, I guess technically speaking. But yeah, it's just, for me, I'm looking at it and I'm just thinking, this guy has protections from searches and seizures and government intrusion into his life, just like we all do. And unless you can point to a crime that actually was committed that you can just point to, you don't have a reason to investigate. You don't have it's just scary. You don't have a reason to go in and start just harassing this man with just laws and lawsuits and investigations and inquiries and attacking all and coming after all. It's like they're going after his accounting firm right now. They're like, listen, we're going to subpoena all your information, and it's just, this is never going to stop.
But you know what that boils down to, though? It boils down to the fact that he switched camps.
Yeah,
that's what it really boils down to. He switched camps.
Yep.
And now they're mad. They are extremely mad that he switched camps. Period. So now they're going to do everything they can. But see, here's the other funny thing too, right? And talking about how the left is intertwining, especially the identitarian left, and how they're trying to intertwine in socialism and fascism into this, right? Mm-hmm. And they want to say that they want to promote this whole socialism bit, etc. So my question for a lot of people is how do you push socialism without actually pushing socialism? Besides the Medicare for all and whatever. Mm-hmm. You know what it is? It's Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump is the epitome of capitalism. Yeah. So what do? You demonize Trump, which would be demonizing capitalism, and say, oh, look at all these violations. Look, he has all these Hispanics maybe illegal working for him. Is this capitalism or is this slavery? They keep pushing narratives like that, what makes people conditioned like, okay, maybe we do need socialism. Because we'll cure all that. But what people don't understand is, quote unquote, what they're trying to point out is crony capitalism.
Yes. Yep.
They don't understand that, right? And it happens across the board. Crony capitalism happens across the board, but they just want to point out capitalism.
Yeah, exactly.
Period.
Yep.
And use Trump as that demonization. It's the same thing with Christianity. You want to demonize Christianity? You call you people pick at people.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, or you demonize the people that are Christians that voted for Donald Trump. See, so the left has it played exactly perfectly, and then now we're at a point where we have the obsessive MAGA movement. And we have the obsessive anti-Trumpers. Y'all both the same people. Y'all are both exactly the same group of people, right? So you have all this obsession on Donald Trump. Meanwhile, they're over here. We're going to slide in, like I talked about on Monday. They passed 4 in the House. They passed 4 votes to stop drilling for oil off of our United States shores. That's part of the Green New Deal. So they showed you the Green New Deal, but then they pass little bills underneath on the way while you're paying attention, being obsessed with Trump, and they keep slicing away at you. Oh, well, we're already doing all this. We must have passed the Green New Deal now, and it's like, while y'all obsessed with Donald Trump, look at what they did.
Yeah, and it's like I haven't even heard of that. And in this age of unlimited information, it's still amazing that little things can slip by like that.
Well, I keep my head on Congress.gov. My TV doesn't leave C-SPAN, so nothing misses me, bro. Nothing. I'm like, wait a minute. You know what I mean? I'm always, especially on Twitter. You follow me, so I'll come on some off-the-wall stuff. People like, where'd you get that from? I'll just post the bill. Oh, snap. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. And while y'all were obsessed, here you go.
No, it's true.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing with the 9/11 bill. Oh, I flipped the lid on that. And we're like, yeah, we need to pass the 9/11. Are you kidding me right now? Do you understand even what this bill does? Do you understand whatsoever what this bill does? Well, we need to support the 9/11 people. And I get that, 100%. Mm-hmm. But at the cost of an open check for 63 years? Are you kidding me?
Oh, my God. Especially when we are, by all estimations, this is actually, for me, this is the number one issue in America right now, is that when you look at our unfunded liabilities, and you look at kind of our obligations with Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and some of these other, just the welfare state in general, the dates may kind of vary here and there, but sometime between 2030 and 2040, money is going to start running out. People who are on these programs are going to see that they're not going to get the money anymore.
Yep, and I think as of this morning, the unfunded liability was $148 trillion.
Oh, is it?
The question is, where's that money going to come from to pay these outlays that need to be paid out in the future? Where's this coming from?
Yeah, I think your estimation of $148 trillion, I think, is kind of generous. I remember I can't remember his name, but it was an economist that testified before Congress about this issue, and he suggested it was as high as $220 trillion. And I mean, but not that it matters.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't remember his name.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I don't remember his name, but I remember, I've talked about him in the past, and his name escapes me right now. He was some, Nobel laureate prize-winning economist, and he was talking about it. He's just like, listen, if you were looking at this data as a private sector entity, you would have to look at it, this certain way, and you guys aren't doing that. Like, you're not accounting for this stuff correctly. So when you do it like the normal way, the standard procedure that anyone else would use, you're coming up with $220 trillion.
Right, and that was, and I remember when he mentioned that was with that was with the current legislation and appropriations. Yes. Now there has been some cuts since then that has eliminated, like Obamacare eliminated at least 30 trillion off of the unfunded liability alone.
Oh God, that is
so. Now we're back down talking like 190, 180, right? And there's been some other cuts along the way since he said that. According to the CBO, it's at about 148 right now. So I was like, oh yeah, that's a good thing. But if we have an open check in 2029 for the 9/11 bill, I mean that can be upwards. They say minimum $5 billion a year.
God, it's funny. I'm reminded by Thomas Sowell that 1 trillion seconds ago there were basically there was like almost nothing. The planet Earth was just a boiling heap of lava and space dust.
Right.
And we're talking about hundreds of trillion. Like it's unfathomable. It's inconceivable for us to really think about what $1 trillion is. It's inconceivable. And here we are just kind of spending and printing and borrowing and issuing bonds and just doing all these insane things that you or I could never get away with this stuff. We could never assume as much debt as the federal government has, and it's just insane to me. As someone who's studied basic economics through Thomas Sowell's book, Basic Economics, the 4th edition specifically, and just knowing that and knowing just like these basics, you look at how the government taxes and spends, and it's amazing that it can even get this far. I mean, it's incredible to me.
I see, and a lot of that too, right? And I'll go back to our lovely Constitution. Mm-hmm. That pesky ratified amendment that you saw that I wrote about, the 17th Amendment in 1913.
Yes.
Is what really kind of did us in, right? Because that was the start, right? Because that's really when the progressive movement really started in this country, was when the 17th Amendment was passed. Mm-hmm. And when it took the power away from the states to send senators to Congress on their behalf, mm-hmm. that took away the state's power from the federal government. You talk about further separation from the people, there it is, right there. And then once they got separated from the people, hey, we can do whatever we want. Hey, and that's what they've been doing since 1913 is exactly what they've been doing whatever they want, when they feel like it, how they want to do it. And we just got to sit here and be like, yeah. And then we elect people to say, okay, we're going to turn this thing around. It's been 106 years and ain't nothing changed. Oh, wait, I forgot. Just a little while ago, 20 some odd years ago, they revised the 17th Amendment in 92, right? And nothing changed. It actually got worse.
They revised it? What do you mean they revised the 17th Amendment?
Yeah, they revised the 17th Amendment in 1992. They changed the wording, if I remember correctly. Gosh, I remember all that crap in my head, and sometimes it doesn't come to me immediately.
Oh, I understand. I feel you there. But that's incredible. I thought if you're going to change an amendment, don't you need to go through the Article 5 process to do that?
Technically, no. If you're changing a clause, you're not changing the whole amendment. You're changing the clause. So you don't have to do Article 5 to change a clause.
That seems a little fishy to me.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I would like to, I'll have to actually do some research on Article 5 to see how that works out, because I've never heard of that.
Yeah. Let me find, actually.
Well, I don't want to put you on the spot now. I know that's kind of an in-depth question, but it is interesting. But, you know, and while you're on that subject, you know, to your point earlier when you said you brought up JFK kind of being the start of like the administrative state.
Jimmy Carter, yeah.
Oh yeah, Jimmy Carter, yeah. I would argue that even before that, I think Woodrow Wilson, you know, the time where you do see the 16th and 17th Amendment kind of pass, when you read some of his literature, I mean, this guy was, I think he was probably one of the leading progressives of the time. I mean, he was this college educated, you know, a PhD, you know, one of these college elites. And I mean, I think a lot of his literature had this idea of getting away from the founders, you know, having government be kind of its own autonomous machine where it's just doing work for the people. And it's just, you know, I think especially when you research his administration and kind of his philosophy and his governing philosophy, I think a lot of that stuff can be traced back to him.
I can go with that. I can definitely go with that because he did he did a lot of things. Mr. Wilson did.
Yeah.
That was I'm not going to get into that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot
that
there.
goes deep into a whole other direction.
Yeah. There's a lot with Wilson there. Definitely, that's a different podcast.
No doubt.
Well, what do you think of? You know, we're talking about the Constitution. I think for me, and I want to get your opinion on this because I always enjoy talking to fellow constitutionalists, and one of the things I've been doing lately is I've kind of just been looking at the Constitution, seeing the intent of the framers, seeing how that intent has been distorted and basically ripped apart, and just kind of where we're at today and kind of how we got here. And I've kind of, you know, I've been like, I love the Constitution, but it's, you know, it's obviously not perfect. And I'm like, well, what do you think like the weakest part of the Constitution is in terms of like the three branches of government?
Article 3.
I agree. That's what I've written down as well.
Article 3 is...
Well, yeah, expand on that. I'd love to hear your commentary on it.
Well, judicial review. That just... you know,
Yeah.
Like, that's just one of those things, like, I understand the premise behind judicial review, but look where judicial review has gotten us.
Yeah.
We have, you know, people want to talk about all kinds of different supremacy, but they don't talk about judicial supremacy. They don't talk about this. No one talks about judicial supremacy. I mean, when you can have a lower court judge impose a national injunction, that's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is a dead serious problem that we have.
Absolutely.
Forget Congress not doing their job, right? Forget them not doing their job, right? Or passing their buck to the executive branch, right? And then executive branch, which that's another weak point, executive orders, get the pen out the hand. That's not his job. Get that pen out of his hand.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're increasing... Go ahead.
And then you have the judicial branch that's got to say, well, is this executive order legal or not? And it's like, what? Why are you even determining if it's legal if Article 1 is doing their job? But they're not. They're too busy investigating.
Yeah, I'm sure you love when I'm sure when you get on some of these social media discussions with people and you're talking about the Constitution, originalism, you're talking about the intent of the founders, and then you'll make a case, oh, the Constitution says this, and then you'll get people that say, no, the Supreme Court said in this decision, that this is the Constitution. And it drives me nuts because of this idea of judicial review, where they've just taken a power for themselves that says they're the final arbiter on the meaning of the Constitution. You know, now we have these two worlds. You have this one world of like the, you know, originalism, the intent of the founders in their own words, Federalist Papers, letters. So let's see, I was talking about the judicial precedent though. So the Supreme Court precedent, basically, it creates two different worlds of constitutionalism, where you have like the Constitution, like what it means according to the court, and then the Constitution according what it meant to the people who actually drafted it. And so,
right.
You know, you have over 200 years now of this court precedent that it's like, well, you could just read the Constitution, you could read the Federalist Papers and kind of the original source material from that time period and get an understanding. But oh no, that's not enough anymore. Now you have to read what all these different courts have said over the course of 200 years to get an idea. And again, that's another thing that's almost impossible. Like, I'm not going to.
It's past impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to read all these different court decisions. Like, it's not even humanly feasible.
And I'm the nerd that will actually do that and have done it. Right?
I know some. I don't know all of them.
Look at the biggest controversy right now, right? The 14th Amendment, right? Mm-hmm. And in the particular phrase, the jurisdiction thereof.
Yes.
The question is, and I always pose this to people, which jurisdiction are they talking about? Are they talking about political or territorial? And you wouldn't believe the answers I get. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
So I turn around and I flip the question around on them. Like, so if you're pregnant and you have a kid in Spain, is that kid a Spanish citizen or an American citizen? Well, he's American. Ah.
Why is that?
Political jurisdiction. See? Then I come back at him again. I was like, so if someone illegally comes across the border and has a baby, who's the citizen? The baby? Technically, no, because you just claim political jurisdiction.
Yeah, exactly.
How is that even possible? Anybody that comes into this country, until you're a legal citizen, you are subject to the political jurisdiction of the country you come from.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what was explained by the people that drafted that amendment.
Yes.
And so, I mean, we're lucky in that case where you have this, you have the guy who wrote it, you have the intent, and he's like, listen, this is what it's supposed to be like, this is what we don't want it to be like, this is not what we're saying, this is what we are saying, and you'll have courts come around and just be like, nope, this is the intent of the law because I'm a judge. And to me, it's like, wow. That is, and of course they can get away with it. There's no, you can't get rid of them for being, I would say, neglectful in their duties to be adherent to the Constitution. You know, it's just, you can't get rid of these guys, and this is what we're stuck with.
Yep, and we can actually thank this particular Supreme Court case in 1898, Wong Kim Ark versus the United States for that, right? That particular case right there was cited in 90% of your asylum claims or your illegals that come across and try to claim asylum. That case is cited based on that because that case just specifically laid down its territorial jurisdiction. But that case has never been challenged in the Supreme Court, and I think now, seeing what's happening, it will completely get revoked. But my question is, why hasn't anyone challenged it?
And
why hasn't anyone challenged Wong Kim Ark?
I agree, and it's funny. Like when I like to sometimes play this game. What would I do if I were president? And for me, when I read the Constitution. Obviously, the court doesn't have the final say on constitutional interpretation. I think it's something that's shared among all three of the branches where, I mean, obviously, the legislatures, they have to, in their best judgment, pass laws that are adherent to the Constitution. The executive has to kind of carry out the laws to the best of his ability while still, there's a role that all the branches play in kind of interpreting the Constitution. And if I were the president, I would just ignore some of these Supreme Court decisions. I just, the ones that I could justify were not, I may have to make the case to the American people because I'm a political figure, but I mean, I would be completely okay if we started just rejecting some of these court decisions because the court itself is not a super legislature. It's just, it's acting like it. It's acting like it has this supreme veto power that it can even write its own laws in the case of abortion. If we want to get back to any resemblance of a republic, of our old Constitution, we have to start fighting back against things like the Supreme Court. Right, and I preach that. And I preach that every single day. I do, because it's like, and bringing the focus back to Black America a second, I focused that effort there all the time because if you don't understand your rights in the Constitution and what it is supposed to do, then
you will be part of the loss of America.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now to expand that, for any American to not at least read it and understand the premise. I don't, and I tell you, I don't want you to be a constitutional scholar or a constitutional nerd like me and other folks that can sit here and just quote the Constitution off the top of our head sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. But knowing the premise of that document and knowing what's in that document will get you to understand how important it is. Because too many people want to scrap it. They want to completely scrap it or pretend it doesn't even exist.
Yeah, I mean, they want to scrap it, and they don't even know what it is. They don't even know what it says. They've never actually read it from start to finish, and they want to get rid of it.
Right.
That to me is the most terrifying thing. Well, I know it's kind of late where I am. I'm sure it's you probably want to enjoy your family. I think we'll start wrapping up a little bit, but I want to ask, what amendments would you add to the Constitution? If you could have just control over the Article 5 process, what amendments would you like to see to the Constitution to kind of help fix the Republic, fix some of the gaps that you're seeing now?
I would definitely add a balanced budget amendment. That would probably be the only one I would add, because
interesting.
Everything else covers everything else. I mean, there is not anything in the Constitution that is not covered. Right now, I would like to see the 17th Amendment gone. I'd like to see the 16th gone. Mm-hmm. Right, for many reasons. Right.
Yep.
But really, to get deep down into it, not to push the Constitution aside for a second, we need to find all these laws that contradict the Constitution, and we need to scrap them. We need to challenge them and scrap them. That's first and foremost. Before we even get to the point of adding anything to the Constitution, we need to find all these federal laws that circumvent the Constitution and get rid of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mark Levin has an interesting idea with that in one of his books. I think he proposes like an automatic kind of sunset on laws. So you pass a law and you have to renew that law like on a case-by-case basis, every year or 2 years or whatever it is. And if you don't do that, the law just automatically nullifies itself and goes away, which I love that idea. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm also, in the writing I was telling you about earlier, I've also given a lot of thought to like amendments and kind of I've gotten a lot of good ideas from guys like Todd Douglas, who's written about this really intelligently, Mark Levin, who I just talked about earlier, and I kind of sat back and I kind of really thinking about what a good amendment or what a good law is kind of really all about. And I've kind of, so before I really write my own kind of amendments, and, I'm trying to think about, well, what's the best way for this to, because like you said, a balanced budget amendment, and it's probably, I totally agree with it. One of my fears about something like that is that it's just, what's going to stop people from just ignoring it? I mean, if you say, the government can't spend more than 20% of GDP, what if they do it then? What happens if they do it, the case could be made that nothing will happen. They'll do it, and they'll say, "Oh, well, whatever."
Check. Right.
And there's no one to really keep them in check. And apparently, the worst punishment is that maybe some of them will get voted out of office. Maybe. But for me, I think one of the things you could add to amendments, you could say, listen, if you guys do this, then it kicks in this new process. You give a new power, or really, I guess, a return of power back to the people, where it's like, oh, you can recall senators, you could put them on your own little like court, you can, just something crazy like that. We're like, let's have actual consequences. Like if you or I do something bad, we go to court, we go to prison. These guys, they do stuff that violates the Constitution, and there's no consequence other than just not getting elected. And I feel like that is something that needs to change. We need to put the fire to the feet of these people up there.
Oh, I agree 100% on that, for sure. And I've even, I was part of a group a couple of years ago that even tossed around congressional term limits.
Oh, absolutely.
And my only problem with congressional term limits is exactly what it is. term limits, right? Because I mean, yeah, granted, they should be termed, right? Because our elected officials are supposed to be representative statesmen, as I like to call them, right?
Yes.
But here's the thing: under our current federal structure of 50 states, and congressional term limits would be hard to enforce. Number two, right? Our congressional term limits are already built into the Constitution. It's called the 12th Amendment. So why isn't the 12th Amendment not powerful? Because we have at this point, I would like to say, as a whole, we have a low information electorate. I'm being nice when I say that, right? Because the mechanisms are there to term limit these people in Congress and the Senate. But with an uninformed electorate, it will never happen. So why take away the power from the people to elect who they want and cut them off? If they want someone in office for 20 years, fine. Did y'all legitimately vote for him? Or did you just mark the paper because he's been there before and they haven't heard any new ideas about anything? Right? So that's my problem with a term limits a term limits amendment, because it would impede on the liberties of the people to elect who they want for whatever amount of time. But I do understand the other side of the argument on that, because some of these people get in there and they manipulate and cheat and steal elections and things like that, and they stand there for 20, 30 years. I mean, look at California. California has the mean average oldest congressmen and senators in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I was doing research one time, and I was kind of just looking at how long some of these people have been in Congress for. There's a couple people in Congress who have been there for 60 years. 60 years. That's it. And they haven't done, I can't imagine that. And it's not common. They said 30, 40. I mean, that's very common. People spend their entire lives in government, and it's like, you look at people like Nancy Pelosi, and it's like on a salary of what, like a little shy of $200,000 a year, she's worth like $200 million. It's I wonder why that is. I wonder what her tax records look like,
Right. You have guys like what's in that just passed away, John Dingell, 59 years, I think it was. Robert Byrd was in for 59 years. Carl Hayden was in for like 55. John Conyers, out of I think it was Michigan, 52 years. I mean, it's insane how long these people sit in. I mean, Chuck Grassley, 40, I think 45 some odd years. Yeah. I mean, it's completely. Patrick Leahy was another one. Don Young's another one. Like, it's completely crazy how long these people hold on to these seats. I mean, honestly, I would love to see, like, a senator do 2 terms, right? You're out, right? You just automatically just bow out. You're in the House, okay, maybe 2 terms in the House, you're out.
Right? That's exactly how it used to be back in the day. In the early days of the Constitution, you would either serve 1 or 2 terms, and then you just gave up the seat because it was time. It was time for a new person. Right, but see, here and the other side of that is kind of thankful for that to a point, especially with our current political climate. Like, a lot of these older guys, in their own little way, is saving the republic, because lo and behold, let any of these millennials out here that's part of the Democratic Socialists of America or Communist Party of America get into office, right? Yeah, you got a point there. Like, it's kind of like, what do you do? Where are you at, right? Because the thing is, we don't have a lot of citizen candidates running, and we can't get them to run, especially now, because look at how bad they smearing Trump, how bad they're smearing Kavanaugh, right? Yeah. Or if just a Republican, period. If you're a Republican, you're a racist, you're a white supremacist, and you're a fascist. Yeah, and what's worse is, even if let's say, I'll use myself as an example. I've lived a pretty good life. I haven't, I don't have a criminal record. I would dare to say that I am in pretty good standing with my fellow peers and where I grew up, and I think if I were to run for like any kind of office, or God forbid a presidency, I mean, not only would my life be just torn to pieces, but they wouldn't find anything. Well, it'd be funny. I'd be interested to see who I attacked. I'd be interested to see who I, molested or something. And the thing is, they'll just make up lies. I mean, look what's happening to Trump and Kavanaugh now. Just total baseless lies, and yet half the country believes that it's true. That half the country thinks Brett Kavanaugh is some serial, rampant, racist rapist. Maybe not racist,
right.
but at least rapist. Or maybe both. Who knows?
Right. Yeah, I know. And it's you just sit here, you just look at it, and you're just like, what can you say?
I know. It's
it's like you get to a point where, yeah, you want to defend the people that you support, but then, excuse me, it comes to a point where you just have to stop, because you start figuring out you're getting part of the fray that is causing a distraction to push their agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so much sometimes, and sometimes you just you go to bed and you're just like, wow, like what is happening with our political discourse? And luckily, thank God, there are guys like you out there who are willing to sit down and have conversations and to discuss things for better or for worse. And it's always a pleasure to talk with guys who also are just as passionate about the Constitution as I am. And so it's been a pleasure, my friend. I think it's a good place to cut it off. Final thoughts for the audience.
Keep your head in the Constitution, and always remember, you as people have to fight for your liberty on every level, federal, state, and local.
All fronts.
But if you're not fighting for liberty, especially at the local level, nothing else will ever matter ever again.
Deep stuff. Excellent. Well, Roderick, thank you so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. I hope you had as much fun as I had.
Oh, I always have fun when we have discussions. Always have fun when I have discussions, because it's, it's the thing that I always say. So I'll end with this. I don't want to extend it too long. Is that
sure? Take your time.
We don't have enough people in the political sphere anymore putting out ideas. We're getting suppressed. We're in an age of ideas are being suppressed.
Yep,
we're in a suppression idea era right now. And you know what? I'm the type of person, I'll sit down with someone from the alt-right, I'll sit down with an anarchist, a communist, a socialist, whomever, just to get the ideas out there. Because if you don't know what these people think, you don't understand, where they're coming from, why they think the way they do, and then you automatically label people for the idea they have. Yeah, so what? You're a socialist. Why? Why are you a socialist? Let's talk this out. Let me understand why you became a socialist, right? Because we're at a point now, we shouldn't be trying to change people's minds. We should be trying to feel the ideas of others and see how we can make all the ideas work together, and that's what America is about.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the more conversations we have, the better, because you're right. We're in an age of censorship where, Twitter right now, even some of you guys, I noticed that some of your things don't trend, some of your likes go away, some, people aren't seeing some of the things you're posting. And we're not talking about like blue check mark, 100,000 people following. We're talking about guys with 2,000 followers. We're talking about kind of,
right,
non-verified people, just people who are, especially on Twitter. It's insane on Twitter. And even more so because they flat out, deny it and kind of blame it on, algorithms and, we need to do better. And, just so much craziness out there when people are just be honest about it. You don't want conservatives on your platform.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That is pretty much it. You nailed it right. You nailed it right on the head right there, brother.
Yeah, to fully expand on that, they brought people on the platform and they sold it to us. Oh yeah, this is just a platform. You put out your ideas. Everyone's welcome here. And then once you got really big and powerful, you changed your mind. But now you're lying about it. You don't want to admit that. And that's the part that upsets me. Like, if Twitter wants to do that, fine, but just be honest about it so that we can take our ideas elsewhere. Take our content, our followers, our people, we'll go somewhere else if you don't want us there.
Right. That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct.
Yeah, it's a tough world, but you know what? That's why we're here. We're here to fight. We're here to fight for liberty, and that's all we can do.
That's it. That's
Awesome.
it, my brother. Definitely keep it up the good fight.
I will.
And I know I'll keep my fire burning. Sure.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. We'll back each other up. But hey, thank you so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate it. Keep doing the great work you're doing, and we definitely should do it again sometime.
Oh, we will. We'll definitely do it again. We'll have to get you over on the Conservative Enclave on a specific night. So.
Oh, that'd be fun. It'd be a ton of fun. I'm definitely down.
No doubt. All right, my man.
All right. Well, have a good night. Thank you again so much.
All right, thank you again. Appreciate you.
Till next time.
Till next time.
Bye-bye.